Hello, everybody. It's about to be Shabbos pretty soon, so I wanted to do a video before Shabbos, so that when Shabbos starts, I can just kind of relax. There's a couple things I want to talk about in this week's video. I don't remember if I did a video last week. I think I did, but I don't think I advertised it on Facebook. But I probably will go back and do that. But so there's really nothing really super specific I wanted to talk about this week, other than obviously Rosh Hashana, the New Year, that sort of thing. And so it got me thinking. Sorry, pardon me. It got me thinking in relation to this channel and everything, to my channel, like what kind of a New Year's sort of Rosh Hashanah thing would I do that would be like in the spirit of like the kind of stuff I talk about on this channel. So I decided I would talk about the concept of tshuva and the concept of renewal, and specifically how that's related to my personal evolution over the last couple years, in my sort of worldview and my thinking about things, which I really haven't sat down and really laid out specifically. Oh God, I'm so sorry. How rude. But first off, though, I want to introduce you to somebody. His name is Midnight Muffin, but we just call him Muffin for short. Or, as I have like to nickname him, as I have nicknamed him, the Void of Despair, because he's black. And I know you're like, wait, what did you just say? You'll see. Everybody, I'd like to introduce you to the Void of Despair, the pit of agony and suffering, the very face of eternal pain and torment. Did you just fart? God, your farts are stinky. You got stinky farts. Stinky farts. So this little guy was a rescue. And he's very bitey. As you can tell, he's very bitey. Because he's still trying to nurse. It's so funny. He'll like lean over. And he'll just like bite onto my neck. Like Dracula. And then he'll just like. And I'm like, hey. I don't got boobs. I'm not a chick. I'm sorry, but I cannot provide you with that. Even if I did, I'm also not a cat. Well, if I was a woman, of course I would breastfeed the cat. Anyway, he's so bitey. You're so bitey. You're so bitey. And your farts are stinky. But he makes up for it by being a cutie. Are you a cutie? I love you. Look at that face. Okay. He's gonna hang out in his little cat condo. You gonna hang out in your cat condo? Are you a good boy? Are you a good agent of chaos? I love you. You're a good boy. Anyway, so what I want to talk about is in relation to everything with politics and the news and all that. So first of all, I'd like to start out by sort of jumping backwards a little bit, and talk about something that will sort of kind of segue nicely into the topic, and that is, I recently saw a video of AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, where she basically took her time to speak on the House floor, she decided that her time would be best used to go on the House floor and defame and smear and, quite frankly, blatantly lie about a man who was just recently murdered in front of his wife and 2 small children, all for the crime of wanting to have a conversation and voice his God-given and constitutional right to freedom of speech. She went on TV and made up a bunch of bogus, absurd lies about Charlie Kirk of blessed memory. Now, I'm not going to get into all of the different things, except the last one, because it's the one I know best. And this is one of the reasons why I don't have a bad view of Charlie Kirk, and why I already had a positive view of him. So when I heard about his killing, I was really shocked and saddened. Then, of course, when I went online and watched the actual footage, I've seen both the edited and the raw, unedited version several times of both, by the way, of both versions, of the edited and raw version. I've seen, and because it showed it from like different camera angles, it's really brutal. It's really, really, really brutal. Even for somebody that's grown up watching Freddy Krueger and Jason and all this shit, it's a hard thing to watch. It's really hard to watch. I mean, it was just so sudden, you know. Somebody asks him a question about statistics about like deaths from gun violence, and then he goes, is that considering or not is that counting or not counting gang violence? And then he puts the thing down, and then you hear almost it almost sounds like an old school shot put, like, you know, that sort of thing. It was almost like an old school, you know, that old school shot put sound, like from an old English rifle, and it's just like, and then you just see instantly, he like, at first he makes a face like this, like he's cringing, like they just like he just smelled one of Void's farts. And, okay, I'm sorry, baby, that was inappropriate. This is supposed to be a serious topic. I apologize. That was inappropriate for this part of the topic. I'm trying to honor the legacy of a man, and I'm talking about farts. So, I apologize. That was inappropriate. But, it's still funny, though. Anyway. Maybe it was inappropriate, but it was still good. Yeah, and you just see, he has this look like of almost like disgust, and then he raises up his arms, and I guess that's some sort of muscular, you know, like, automatic response, whatever, like thing, and then you just see him like this, and you just see just a fountain of blood, just like in a horror movie, like literally like Kill Bill style, just like it was brutal, and of course there's now scumbags coming out with T-shirts with an etch, like a sketch of a guy on a stool going like this with stuff like water, blood, you know. Obviously, it's supposed to be an outline of Charlie Kirk being shot and dying, and people are buying this and wearing it on T-shirts because, you know, it's cool. It's cool to celebrate the death of an innocent man in front of his family, in front of his wife and 2 small children, who will now never get to grow up with a father, who will now never again get to be tucked in and kiss goodnight and say their nightly prayers with them, who will never get to go to church and, you know, sit in the pew and go play with their friends and run around and play with mommy and daddy and all that sort of wonderful stuff. And, we'll never again get presents, and we'll never again have birthdays with daddy, and we'll get to sit on his shoulders and, get tossed in the air like daddies like to do with their kids, and tucked in and kissed good. Well, I already said that one. But, all of that's all over. That's done. That's the end of that. And all of that ended in an instant. Just one bullet, just one shot, one little noise, just, and then that's all it took to end a man's life and to steal a loving husband from his wife, and a kind, sweet, loving father, a dedicated, loyal, devoted father to his 2 small children, who will now have to grow up without their dad because of this, because he was murdered, and now they don't ever get to see him again. Well, one day in heaven, obviously. But what I want to address is what AOC said, which was such a lie, is that she, of course, and I've heard, and other people have said this to me, saying that, well, he promoted the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, which the neo-Nazi version of which, by the way, says that the Jews are bringing in immigrants from non-white countries to the United States to depopulate the white population and to basically kill off the white race in the U.S. That's like the really crazy neo-Nazi version of it. There's a more mainstream sort of conservative position, point of view of it, is that elites, not necessarily Jews per se, although some are Jews, but not by no means not most or all, are contributing to bringing in people from other countries who do not share our culture, who want to come into Western countries to reap the material benefits, but don't want to make any sort of real not ideological, but any real sort of nationalistic commitment to the nation itself and in the nation's values. So that's why, for example, you have people from Muslim countries coming to the United States who want Sharia law in the U.S. Well, if you want Sharia law, you should have just stayed there, wherever you came from, where they had it. Don't bring it here, because we don't want it. So, that's what Charlie believed in, by the way, and which is true, by the way. And there's even many people from the left, people on the left, for example, Bill Maher would be one example, who is not a spineless, dickless, ballless coward. Although I want to give respect to I do want to give respect to women, to strong, powerful women out there. So, chicks that still have labias, because I just can't think of a equivalent to men's balls. So, that's the one I'm going to go with. So, labialess chicks, or chicks without vulvas, I don't know if this is hitting the same, but, who are not spineless cowards, who are calling out this sort of, bullshit. Now, the racist, crazy neo-Nazi version of the theory is, yeah, that's ridiculous. But the general idea of people who don't share our values who are coming here to reap the material benefits of our culture while not wanting to commit to our nationalistic ethos and our mores and our customs, and actually want to bring their way of life and the aspects of their way of life which do conflict with ours. For example, hating gay people, mistreating women, treating women like second-class citizens, banning public displays of religion, except for one very specific one. That sort of thing. But one of the things that she said about him, which I can address really well, is that she said that he was an anti-Semite. Which is the stupidest, most ridiculous thing in the world for anybody who's ever watched anything by him that shows that Charlie Kirk of blessed memory was clearly not an anti-Semite. Far from it. He was one of the biggest friends of Israel and of the Jewish people that we have today. And his death is a huge and major tragic loss for the Jewish people. He was a very good friend of ours, and he was out there on the ground in the campuses changing hearts and minds away from all of the intifada, jihadist, anti-Semitic, anti-Israel bullshit. Like this woman who recently at the Emmys said that she's ashamed of her Judaism, or that her Judaism demands justice, and therefore her Judaism demands that she be anti-Zionist. And she wore this little pin with a red handprint on it, which is literally a symbol for celebrating the murder of innocent Israelis. Because what most people are so fucking ignorant that they don't know what that pin means. Do you know what that pin means? All of you liberals out there, all of you left-wing people out there who wear your little red hand pin for Palestine, you know what that is, right? There was a convoy of Israeli soldiers who were off duty and had taken a wrong turn and wound up in a Palestinian village. And they were asking for directions when they were then arrested by the local Palestinian police and detained in a Palestinian prison. Then a wild mob assembled outside of the prison, and several members of the wild mob were let in. And what happened next was quite literally something out of one of the Terrifier movies. Because this wild mob of savages, and if you object to me using that terminology, by the end of this story, you tell me a word that you think is more appropriate for these people in this particular story and instance. I'm not saying all Arabs or all Palestinians. I'm saying in this specific story. Well, they then went with knives and proceeded to hack the soldiers into pieces. And they didn't just hack their limbs off. They hacked them open and then ripped them. They hacked their arms and then tore them off and literally ripped these people apart. These soldiers literally tore their limbs apart. And then a young 16-year-old Palestinian boy who was part of this then went and put his bloody hands on the glass to show the crowd outside that he had killed these people. And they cheered with jubilation, with unfettered, unbridled joy that this young man had just murdered and ripped limb from limb these young men who were off duty. Now, of course, all the extremists will go, well, they were part of the evil neo-Nazi IDF, so why should we feel bad, and da-da-da-da-da. Well, let me ask you a question. Do you think that any Jews that escaped from the ghettos and the concentration camps, I mean, for the most part, very few did, but the few that did they then go into German cities and start and find off-duty, non-working people, not like just regular officials, not concentration camp, people, not members of the SS with the, that shot, or the Einsatzgruppen, may their wicked memory be erased, who shot people by the thousands. No, just regular, meter maids, regular police, just regular German police, their job is to just write tickets, Again, they're part of the larger Nazi apparatus, so in general, no, I do not have sympathy for them. But I'm saying in this particular instance, and then went in to a German city and found those meter maids and then brutally ripped them apart. No, that never happened. And that would have never happened. Because that's not part of the Jewish ethos. That's not part of the ethos of civilized, westernized people. That's the ethos of savages. That's the ethos of bloodthirsty tribalism, of brutality. But what I want to get into is I want to talk about how but so that's what the red handprint is. So when you see somebody wearing that and you're like, oh, it's so great of them for Free Palestine. No, that's what they're honoring. That's what they're celebrating. They may as well just walk around with a t-shirt with a big giant close-up of the face of baby Hadassah Fogel. The Fogels were a young family living in one of the settlements, which just the fact that they lived there was good enough for so many on the left to see them murdered. Who their home one Friday night, one Shabbat night, after they'd finished their Shabbat meal and said the ending prayers and gone to bed, the two vile, sick, evil, inhuman monsters invaded their home and brutally slaughtered them. And baby Hadassah, who was less than 1 year old, that was the little baby, they decapitated her. So, by the way, for all of you people out there that want to go, the Palestinians don't decapitate babies, because that story about the 40 babies in Kibbutz Be'eri has been proven wrong. Yeah, you're right, it was proven wrong. But there were other cases of babies on October 7th that were beheaded, that were burned alive, as well as beheaded. There were not the 40 babies in Kibbutz Be'eri, specifically, that was disproven, but there were babies who were beheaded, and there were babies who were burned alive on October 7th. And it's pretty much, it is indisputable. It's been proven over and over and over and over and over again at this point, which of course doesn't matter because, when it comes to the Free Palestine movement, they don't care about facts or logic. But what I want to talk about, so if you want to say, well, Palestinians don't decapitate babies, well, look at what happened back in, I think it was in 2016 when that happened, or maybe even longer. It was many years ago, but it was so brutal and so horrific, it still stands out, in my memory. It should stand out in everyone's memory. Unfortunately, everybody seems to have forgotten it. The same way people seem to have forgotten what happened with Shiri Bibas and her two beautiful children. People have already forgotten. It's pathetic. But so that kind of leads into what I wanted to talk about, which is that, I used to consider myself a very, very liberal person. And I still, for the most part, really do. But I was a big Democrat. I was a Trump hater. I was super anti-Trump and all of that, And I was a big supporter of the two-state solution. I was passionate. I was a passionate defender of the two-state solution. And when the war started after October 7th, I was very critical of Israel's initial response. I even called it the beginnings of genocide. I was very, very, very much on the side of not necessarily of a ceasefire. Even then, I didn't want a ceasefire. I wanted the war to continue because I wanted to see Hamas destroyed, and that's, of course, I still do. But since that time, and really, like, in the following months, I really started to change my view, especially when Israel did their first humanitarian pause for about a week or two and allowed tons of aid to go in to the Gaza Strip, which was then immediately stolen by Hamas. But that sort of was like, wait a second. That's not a genocide. If this was indeed a true genocide, as many keep claiming, with, by the way, no evidence, other than ridiculous hearsay and easily debunked myths and lies, if it indeed is this terrible genocide that we are all talking about, and that even I was saying it was the beginning of and a precursor to, what kind of a genocide just stops for 2 weeks and just lets aid in? Doesn't really sound like a genocide at all, does it? And from there, I sort of followed up with the news and the progression and everything, and I saw that it's not a genocide. It's a war. It's a war for self-defense and for justice after a horrible, unbelievably, both in its scale and scope and in its content and just the sheer brutality of it, of this horrific massacre where 1,200 people were brutally murdered and over 260 were then taken hostage. And to this day, there are still 40 plus hostages. I think at least half of them are considered or are known to still be alive, being held prisoner in underground tunnels by brutal killers, many of whom probably murdered their relatives, watched murder their relatives, and are now holding them prisoner. And we watched basically the left, people on the left, liberals, almost universally lose their freaking minds to such an extent that you would think, if you took all of the criticism and everything that you've heard just from the left in the last 2 years, 2+ years, you would think that Israel and the Jews are responsible for the First and Second World War. Everything bad in the Middle East, every war, every bad thing that's happening in the Middle East, their fault. The killing of George Floyd and police violence in America in general, the war in Ukraine, let's see, global warming, of course, let's see, the Great Recession that we had back in 2008, in the mid-2000s, early to mid-2000s, let's see, human trafficking, drug addiction, the rapid spread of drugs, the crisis on the southern border, all mass shootings, all school shootings, all political assassinations, let's see, the crime rate in all the great cities in the United States, homelessness throughout the U.S., but especially hitting hard here in LA, specifically in Southern California in general. If you would listen to them, you would think that in one way or another, Zionism and Israel are somehow secretly behind all of those things, which is completely and totally insane. And really, the more rabidly anti-Israel and anti-Semitic the left has become, the more I've myself been driven away from their point of view. And now it's come to a point where, as I've mentioned before, I no longer consider myself a liberal. At best, I call myself a classic liberal. But I identify now as a independent and as a moderate. Because I quite frankly just cannot stomach the extremes from either side. Although I will say, depending on what the issue is, the really, really violent and radical extremes seem to be coming from people whose positions are more on the left, the pro-Palestine side, for example. The shooting of that church by that lunatic, that Catholic church. Forgive me, I don't remember the name of the town where it was, but that happened a few weeks ago. All the way down to, if you listen to Candace Owens, who is another lunatic, but she's a right-wing lunatic, if you listen to her, all the way to the murder of Charlie Kirk. One way or another, the anti-Semites, and this actually is true of both people on the right and the left, anti-Semites of the right and the left, that it doesn't really matter what it is, somehow they're going to find a way to blame Zionism and Israel and the Jews. I mean, it's so much to the point where people who historically have been pretty liberal people are even becoming more either conservative or at least more moderate. Now, one thing that has really changed, in my mind at least, is the way I see it is that the whole very idea of the two-state solution is virtually dead at this point. We did have a two-state solution in Gaza. And what did they do? They elected Hamas, and they spent 20 plus years building a sophisticated, humongous underground network of tunnels so that they could smuggle weapons and rockets and kill and kidnap innocent people. Instead of building hospitals, universities, schools. Now, to be fair, they did build those things. To say that Gaza City was completely lacking in any of those sort of amenities, it would be false. Because, for example, there was the Gaza University in Gaza City, which, if I remember, actually was somewhat of a fairly respected institution at one point, which is really interesting, considering that people want to insist that Gaza is a giant concentration camp, which is fascinating because I don't remember there ever being a accredited university in Auschwitz, but go figure. The logic and sense are not these people's strong suits. But so yeah, I mean, at this point, it's like we did have a two-state solution, and look what happened. So your answer is to give Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, to another group of anti-Semitic fanatical lunatics who want to destroy Israel, and just hope it works this time. And then what? And then it doesn't work, and we wind up having a war. Then we have a war in the West Bank. Great. That sounds like a really great solution. And by the way, the so-called moderate Palestinian Authority, to this day, as we speak, still has not changed their pay-for-slay program, which is a program where if somebody kills Jews in their family, or commits terrorism against Israel, that their family is financially rewarded by the Palestinian Authority. And you might be thinking, well, only people under the Palestinian Authority, though Hamas is different, right? Because they're two different groups. They are two different groups, but there's no distinction in this area, because the pay-for-slay thing, Hamas too. It goes. They do it for Hamas. Hamas fighters kill somebody, the Palestinian Authority pays that family for Hamas killing them. Because at the end of the day, they don't really see themselves as all that different, because their ultimate goal is the destruction of Israel, which, you know, they can see past whatever small, subtle, barely perceptible differences they may have. They can both very enthusiastically agree and partner up when it comes to murdering and expelling all the Jews. Oh, and Christians, by the way. They're not going to get to stay. You really think Hamas are going to let them stay? Are going to let the Church, the Holy Sepulchre, stand? Let the Western Wall remain a place for Jews to go and pray? You really think that's going to happen? Yeah, that's exactly what will happen. Just like the way that Syria is now a beacon of Western freedom and democracy and equal rights for religious, sexual minorities, and women are completely free, and everything is just wonderful. You know, now that they elected that former Al-Qaeda member to Syria, look at what he's done. You said, oh, wait a minute. None of that happened, and Syria still sucks big one? Still sucks big meaty ones? Oh, right. Yeah, because when you elect violent, fanatical terrorists to control something, it's really strange. They don't seem to just suddenly become westernized overnight. I mean, it's the same thing if Hamas would be in charge. And they've said as much. It's in their charter. But, not to belabor this point, but I have noticed that my positions over time have shifted in regards to politics and stuff like that. And I've mentioned that before. Now, what is this really, then, since I've talked about this before, what does this have to do with Rosh Hashana? So, and then I kind of want to go and start Shabbos, so I'm going to end off with this. The thing that people tend to think of with Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur and repentance or teshuvah in Hebrew, people tend to think of teshuvah as like, oh, I'm afraid that I'm going to be punished by God, so it's like I have to go and confess to Him and grovel and ask for forgiveness, and that's what Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashana is all about. That God gives us the chance to beg for forgiveness, and then basically based on, you know, how well we begged, He'll grant us mercy or whatever it is. Or not how well we begged, but if we do beg, then He says, if you do it, you know, you come to the synagogue and you pray and you do all the laws of the holiday, then I'll forgive you of your sins. And I'm not saying that that's incorrect. That is correct. But that's sort of like a very infantile, sort of childish way of viewing it. As I mentioned once before in another video, which was not one of my better ones, unfortunately, I mentioned that one big thing that's made a difference for me in my spirituality is realizing that is to reframe, from myself personally, not in general, but for me personally and from my perspective, to reframe the concept of fear of God from fear as in being afraid of God and His punishment to fear of losing out our connection with God, being afraid to being so afraid of losing that connection that we're willing to do anything and everything to preserve it, to not lose that connection. So it's not the fear of punishment, but it's the fear of losing the connection with God. which for me personally is really big. Because for so long I had the view of like, a punishing, angry God, although one reason I got really into Hasidic philosophy, and again, I've mentioned all this stuff in previous videos, but it's that one of the big revolutions of Hasidic spirituality was to give this idea of God that's different from that he's standing over you with a stick, and telling you, you must do this and you must obey, but rather to view the commandments as opportunities to connect with God. So like keeping kosher and making blessings before and after we eat, that brings God's presence into our eating habits. And the laws of money and, financial justice and giving charity and doing business honestly, that brings God into our jobs, into our employment, into our money concerns, and our financial lives. So the mitzvot are not really so much as that they're supposed to be these ironclad prisons that you're stuck into, but rather to see them as opportunities to bring God into our lives. That's another important shift in my thinking and stuff. But yeah, I mean, just seeing what's happened in the last few years in regards to the war and the international reaction and all of that stuff, it has been very, had a big impact on me and really changed my thinking about a lot of things. For example, I no longer believe in the two-state solution. I don't think it works, and I don't think it ever really was that justified in the first place, but I'm not going to get into that right now. But so rather than seeing tshuva as that sort of thing, as being afraid, rather there's another way to view it, which is connected, at least in my mind, to the fear of losing connection thing, is that not so much as you're groveling for forgiveness for sins, but that you're going through a process of growth and change and commitment to grow. So the tshuva process is more of a, first of all, tshuva, keep in mind, is more of a process than an individual act specifically. And when you realize that, you realize there's different stages and different levels of tshuva, and basically, though, what tshuva really means is it's growth, it's progress, and it's commitment to growing and progressing. And ultimately, tshuva comes from I forget the exactly Hebrew word, but it comes the root of tshuva comes from the Hebrew word for to return. Return to what? Return to God in repentance. Ideally, it's on the face of it, but then on the deeper level, it's to return. It's to go through a process of reconnecting with God. We're all connected with God, always. The problem is that we don't always realize it, or we don't always see it. And so what tshuva does is it's a process that allows us to fix areas where we haven't been connecting with God, so that we can connect with God better. And therefore it's a process of growing as a human being and as an individual, morally and ethically, sure, obviously, of course, but much deeper, it's really about bringing the heart and our mind back to being in alignment with God, and having a connection and a relationship with God. And so that's kind of the way, I've always viewed it. I've never viewed Yom Kippur, which is coming after the Jewish New Year. It comes a week later. It's a 24-hour fast, and you have to go to the synagogue and pray all day. Well, actually, you technically could stay home and pray for Yom Kippur, which, since I don't live really that close to a synagogue or really good walking distance to one, the last few years I've been staying at home and praying at home for Yom Kippur. Although it is obviously more ideal to go to synagogue if you can. But I never viewed Yom Kippur as a sad, depressing, like Tisha B'Av is a very sad, well, the whole day is about sadness, mourning the destruction of the temple, as well as all the subsequent tragedies of the Jewish people that happened to the Jewish people since. But it's not a sad day, Yom Kippur. It's supposed to be a happy day, not a frivolous day, like of joking and clowning around like Purim. There's a seriousness to it, but it is a happy day. It is a joyous day because it's the big opportunity to get forgiveness for our sins and to be given another chance to improve and grow in the next year. And I've always viewed it like that. I've always viewed Yom Kippur in that way, and I've always actually really loved it, and especially what I get out of it, particularly is at the end of it, you just you just feel so new and fresh, and ready to go out there and take on the future, take on the coming year, with strength and faith and determination. Basically, it's the religious Jewish equivalent of the New Year's resolution. So, well, with that being said, I'm gonna go get ready for, go start Shabbos, and I just want to wish everybody a happy, meaningful, fulfilling, joyous, deep, and purposeful Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur. I'll probably do another video in between Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur, more specifically about Yom Kippur itself. But yeah, but that'll be later. So with all that, I pray for everyone to have all of those wonderful things, and that we should all see in the coming year the end of all our tragedies and sorrows, and the war, and our hostages to come home, and this terrible war to end, and all the violence and craziness and insanity happening to just if not go away, at least vastly tone itself down. So essentially, I'm praying for peace. When you break it all down, I'm praying for peace. Anyway, thank you all for listening, and I'll talk to you in the next one. As I always say, love, peace, and chicken grease.